Good morning, folks, and God bless. So today we'll be reading Genesis 15, and we'll see about 16 maybe too. Okay? After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Then the word of the Lord came to him, This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. He took him outside and said, Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, So shall your offspring be. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. He also said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you the land to take possession of it. This land to take possession of it. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? So the Lord said to him, Bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. Abram brought those to him, cut them in two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. Then birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at an old age, good old age. In the 4th generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot and a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, To your descendants I give this land, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. Okay. So that one is pretty interesting. So, at the very beginning of this chapter, God acknowledges himself as Abraham's reward. And I don't know if that means that he's proffering the reward, which is this covenant, or if God himself and his presence is the reward. And he says, I am your shield. Do not be afraid, I am your shield. So, obviously, I think to be approached by God is a very intimidating thing. But God is saying, I'm on your side. My power and might is here to protect you, not to harm you. As we'll see recapitulated later, I have plans to prosper you. And then he has him look to the stars to see the innumeracy of them, and makes a promise. And Abraham believed the Lord, and it was credited to him as righteousness. And I'll see a lot of talk about that later with Paul, about the righteousness of faith. And as he talks about what faith is, and he'll use this example here too. And so God then tells him that just as I have led you this far, I'll keep leading you, and I'll give you the land. And we see the fulfillment of the initial stages of Abram's journey, and how that has now come to a covenant. He knows what land it will be now. And we see that the Lord has him do this ritual, this sacrifice. And he brings a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, with a dove and a young pigeon. There's certainly something to be said about those things, but it's not something I've thought about enough. And so I'm not going to speculate about why it is those particular animals. But I do find it interesting. And the birds, he did not have them cut in half, which we'll see later in the rules for sacrifice. I believe in Leviticus that are given to Moses, that there are different rules about the birds and how to prepare them for sacrifice. And we kind of see that here. I guess we see that there, not originally here. But what is probably most important in this passage to me that stands out, and it, it's just what hits me, is, well, and I haven't thought this part through totally, but birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep. So Abram spends the evening chasing birds away from his sacrifice to make sure that it's not contaminated, that it's not devoured, scavenged, right? And so there's definitely something symbolic about that. Also, this is one of those chapters. There's a lot going on. But then God starts to talk about the Israelites' time in Egypt and their enslavement. And he sends a fire pot and a blazing torch. A smoking fire pot and a blazing torch to cross between the animals. And isn't that so reminiscent of the Israelites crossing out of Egypt and moving through the Dead Sea, or Red Sea, and dividing the waters? And here he's had him divide the animals so that this smoking pot and this blazing torch can pass through it, just as God directed the Israelites as a pillar of smoke and fire through their exodus and trials in the wilderness. And I find that very interesting. And again, he goes on to more clearly define what regions will go to Abram and his descendants. So, but it's really interesting to see this foreshadowing of the Israelites' exodus from Egypt, and this smoking fire pot, and this blazing torch, and having that come right after the birds of prey, having to chase them off, and the deep darkness. Okay, this makes sense. The Israelites are put into labor. In the land of Egypt, they're enslaved. They're making sacrifices. And and not making sacrifices in the sense of religious, but I mean just as a people. They're forced into this position of sacrifice and enslavement. And Pharaoh comes and attempts to completely destroy them prior to their exodus. He's increasing the uh, the labor that they're forced to do, and um, in that way, you could see that the rulers of Egypt and that Pharaoh is much like the birds, and the having to chase off the birds, the foreshadowing of the plagues, and coming prior to their eventual escape and crossing of the sea. So I don't know. That's what comes to mind to me. And again, I am not a Bible expert by any means. I've probably gone through this book maybe 2 or 3 times, and there's probably chapters in it that I've only read once. So that all said, what do you think? And if you think something different, let me know, because I want to learn. I want to understand what's in this book. So, chapter 16, we might be able to make it through this one too this morning. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." "Your slave is in your hands," Abram said. "Do with her what you think is best." Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you running?" "I'm running away from my mistress Sarai," she answered. And then the angel of the Lord told her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." The angel added, "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "You are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man, and his hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility towards all his brothers." She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees me." For she said, "I have now seen the one who sees me." That is why the well is called Bir Lahai Roi. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. Okay. So, God promises a son to Abram, but we can see that there's doubt on the side of Hagar. No, not Hagar, Sarai. And so she comes up with this idea to have her slave bear children of Abraham, and that maybe this is how she can have this family. And isn't this like us? If God gives us something to do, and we don't see how it's supposed to work out, it's so easy for us to try to twist it into what we think it should be. And I think this is that idea of leaning not on our own understanding. You read in Proverbs, Because if we do lean on our understanding, then we will try to make the pieces fit, and we can't see enough of the picture to do it well. And so there's always going to be some mismatched pieces. Things are going to come out a little crazy, and it's not going to be what God had asked or wanted. Really, if God makes a promise, the best thing we can do is sit on our hands. Because how can we possibly do it any better than God can? Now, when I say sit on our hands, it doesn't mean that we're still and in a physical sense and absolutely just lazy. That's not the case. Waiting for God to show up and do it all. No, but the idea is that we don't try to make it work insofar as we think it, insofar as how we think it should work, right? I think it's leaving it to God, letting God work out the details, and all you do is show up each day. All you got to do is show up. And if you make the right choice in each moment, if you let love lead your heart and not fear, knowing that there's a promise that God has given you that's on the other side of that love, that the joy of that promise allows you to live with love, even in the difficult moments, then it will come. But if you let the worry and the anxiety and the disbelief get in the way, then it may not. And worse yet, you might end up really putting a wrench in things. Here, things still work out, and they still have the child that God promised to them because God makes good on his promises. But now they also have another child, and they also have discord in their home, and there's a lot that happens here. Now it's interesting. So Hagar starts mistreating Sarai, and well, there's more that you can say about that later. And Sarai casts her out. Well, it doesn't cast her out, she just starts being, mistreating her back. And so Hagar says, okay, I'm out of here. But God says, hey, what are you doing? And it's interesting, too, that Abram is really passive in this. He doesn't tell Sarai what to do. He responds, your slave is in your hands, which is very, very reminiscent of Ahab, that we'll see later in Kings, 2 Kings. Ahab is indecisive and passive to a fault, and relinquishes his power to Jezebel, who makes a real mess of things. And we see a similar situation here, because Ahab lets Jezebel kind of get away with stuff, and then Jezebel chases Elijah out into the wilderness, and I think by a stream. And here you have Abram lets Sarai make this decision, and Sarai ends up treating Hagar in a way that chases her off out into the wilderness by a stream. And there God meets her. And similarly with Elijah, there God meets Elijah. So there's definitely some foreshadowing of that dynamic that's going to be coming up later too. And I think this is also a recapitulation of Adam and Eve, where we see that the woman has become a symbol up until this point of the temptation of the flesh, seeing the fruit, believing it would be good to eat, and then giving in against God's command. And here, seeing the opportunity to be abusive towards Hagar and giving in to the temptation of the flesh. So, anyway, then we see that Ishmael will come, and he's born, and we've heard that he's going to have a hard time of it. And I think I'll just leave it there, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and enjoy your morning, and God bless you.